Welcome to Cryptid Monologues. Here we tell stories of the cryptid kind. We hope to fill your mind with thrilling, suspenseful entertainment. Please relax and enjoy. Thanks for joining. Whispers in the Wild. The road to the cabin twisted like a ribbon through the dense forest, the sunlight filtering through towering pines and firs, dappling the dirt path in patches of gold. Matt was at the wheel of his old Jeep, the engine rumbling as it climbed higher into the North Cascades, carrying us closer to the off-grid cabin his parents owned. "You're gonna love this place," Matt said, grinning as he downshifted to tackle a steep incline. No cell service, no distractions, just the two of us, the woods, and the best weekend ever. I leaned back in the passenger seat, my window rolled down to let in the crisp mountain air. "I'm all in," I said. "This is exactly what I need after finals." We crested a hill, and there it was, a small wooden cabin tucked into a clearing, surrounded by a fortress of trees, and a stack of split firewood leaned against the porch. Matt parked the Jeep, and we unloaded our gear. Coolers stuffed with food, sleeping bags, and a stack of old board games for the evenings. Inside, the cabin was cozy and rustic, with a stone fireplace, mismatched furniture, and shelves lined with books and trinkets. A single solar panel outside powered a few lights, but otherwise, the cabin relied on a wood stove for heat and an old-fashioned lantern for light. By late afternoon, we had settled in. Matt chopped kindling while I explored the woods behind the cabin. The forest was alive with the rustle of leaves, the distant chatter of a squirrel, and the occasional cry of a bird overhead. It felt wild and untouched, a sanctuary far removed from the noise of everyday life. That evening, we built a fire and roasted sausages over the flames, laughing as we swapped stories and made plans to hike up toward Hart's Pass the next day. The stars were out in full force, a glittering expanse overhead, and the only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the occasional hoot of an owl. Night disturbances. It was well past midnight when I woke to a sound. Thunk. I sat up in my sleeping bag, the darkness inside the cabin pressing in around me. Thunk. It came again, a dull, hollow sound like something striking the wooden roof. "Matt?" I whispered, nudging him awake. "Huh?" he groaned, rubbing his eyes. "Listen," I said. The sound came again, louder this time. Thunk, thunk, thunk. "What the hell?" Matt muttered, sitting up. He grabbed the flashlight from his pack and clicked it on. The beam of light sliced through the cabin's dim interior. We both froze as another sound joined the first, a sharp smack against the side of the cabin, followed by a series of rapid taps on the roof. It was as if small rocks were being thrown at us. "Is it hail?" I asked, though I knew it wasn't. The air had been calm, the sky clear when we'd gone to bed. Matt shook his head. "Doesn't sound like it." He got up, slipping on his boots. "Stay here," he said. "Like hell I'm staying here alone," I said, following him to the door. Matt opened it cautiously, his flashlight sweeping across the porch and the clearing beyond. The forest loomed like a black wall, the trees swaying slightly in the breeze. "I don't see anything," he said, stepping outside. I followed, the cool night air biting at my skin. The forest was eerily quiet, too quiet. The usual sounds of crickets and rustling leaves were absent, replaced by an oppressive stillness. Then, from somewhere in the darkness, a rock sailed through the air, landing with a thud near the porch. "Who's out there?" Matt shouted, his voice ringing through the clearing. No answer. A second rock followed, bouncing off the roof and rolling to a stop near our feet. "Cut it out!" Matt yelled again, his voice more forceful this time. And then we heard it, a faint murmur just beyond the tree line. It wasn't the rustle of leaves or the creak of branches. It was voices. At first I thought it might be hikers or campers, but the cadence was strange, the words unintelligible. It wasn't English or any language I recognized. The murmurs were low and guttural, punctuated by sharp clicking sounds. "What is that?" I whispered, my chest tightening. Matt didn't answer. His flashlight trembled slightly in his hand as he aimed it toward the trees. The murmurs grew louder, overlapping as though several voices were speaking at once. Then, just as suddenly as they had started, they stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. "I don't like this," Matt said, his voice barely audible. "We need to go inside, now." We backed into the cabin, locking the door and securing the shutters. Matt stoked the fire while I grabbed a hatchet from the woodpile. For hours we sat in silence, listening as the sounds continued. Thumps on the roof, taps on the windows, and every so often the eerie murmurs from the forest. They seemed to move, circling the cabin, sometimes close, sometimes distant. Morning light and the store. By dawn the sounds had stopped, but neither of us had slept. When the sun broke through the trees, we decided to leave. As we loaded the jeep, the ground around the cabin revealed the evidence. Small rocks littered the area, and faint impressions in the dirt hinted at something large moving nearby. On the way down the mountain, we stopped at a small general store. The place smelled of cedar and coffee, its shelves lined with camping gear, local honey, and postcards of the North Cascades. The shopkeeper, an older man with a grizzled beard, greeted us from behind the counter. "You boys look like you've seen a ghost," he said, chuckling. Matt hesitated, but then asked, "Has anyone around here ever reported strange things happening in the woods?" The man's smile faded. He glanced around the empty store before leaning forward. "What kind of strange things?" "Rocks being thrown, weird noises," I said, "like voices, but not any language we could understand." The shopkeeper's expression darkened. "You stayed up near Hart's Pass, didn't you?" Matt nodded. "You're not the first to talk about that," he said. "Over the years, plenty of folks have come through here with stories like yours. Rocks, strange sounds, shadows in the woods. Some say it's just the wind or animals. Others—" He trailed off, eyeing us carefully. "Others think it's something else, something not quite human." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you think it is?" I asked. The man shrugged. "I think the mountains hold their secrets, and not all of them are meant to be found." We thanked him and left the store, neither of us speaking until we were back in the Jeep. The drive home was quiet, the weight of the shopkeeper's words settling over us like a heavy fog. Neither of us ever went back to that cabin. Two tickets to Peach's Ridge. Every great hunting adventure begins with a lottery ticket, and for Tim and Charlie, this one was no exception. Each year, hunters across the state clamored for a chance at the elusive bull elk tag for Peach's Ridge, a permit that carried the promise of a lifetime hunt. With only a handful available and thousands applying, it wasn't just a hunt, it was a dream. Tim leaned back in his chair at the dining table, his laptop open to the state's wildlife application portal. His brow furrowed as he read through the fine print for the third time. "So we're clear on this, right?" he said, glancing at Charlie, who was sprawled out on the couch with a soda in hand. "If one of us draws, it's a partnership tag. We're both in." Yeah, I got it," Charlie said, waving him off. "We've talked about this 10 times, man. You think I'm gonna flake on you now?" Tim rolled his eyes. "You flaked on that fishing trip last spring." "My truck broke down," Charlie protested. "Besides, this is different. This is Peach's Ridge we're talking about." Tim couldn't argue with that. Peach's Ridge wasn't just a hunting spot. It was a legend. Nestled in the highlands of the state's most rugged backcountry, The ridge was home to some of the largest elk ever documented. The terrain was brutal, the weather unpredictable, and the elk cunning, all of which only added to its allure. "All right," Tim said, entering their information into the portal. "Applications are in. Now we wait." The draw. April came and went, and the application was submitted. Weeks passed, and life went on as usual. Tim worked his shifts at the lumber yard while Charlie juggled his part-time gig at the sporting goods store with his side hustle fixing up old ATVs. By June, they'd almost managed to put the lottery out of their minds when the email arrived. Tim was in the middle of dinner when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and froze. Subject: "Congratulations, you've been selected for the 2024 Peaches Ridge Bull Elk Tag." "Holy," he whispered, his fork clattering onto his plate. He dialed Charlie's number with shaking hands. "What's up?" Charlie answered, his voice casual. "We got it." There was a pause, then an explosive, "No way! You're messing with me." "Check your email," Tim said, grinning now. He heard Charlie fumbling with his phone, followed by a triumphant whoop. "Peaches Ridge, baby! We're going to Peaches Ridge!" The preparation. The hunt wasn't until November, giving Tim and Charlie plenty of time to prepare. Securing the tag was only the beginning. The next few months were a whirlwind of planning, gear purchases, and strategy sessions. They pored over topo maps, marked potential glassing points, and practiced shooting at long distances. Tim upgraded his scope, while Charlie overhauled their camping gear to withstand the ridge's notorious storms. "You sure your knees can handle this?" Charlie teased one evening as they packed their backpacks. "You're not as spry as you used to be." "My knees will be fine," Tim shot back. "The real question is, can you handle the altitude?" "I'll be fine," Charlie said with mock bravado. "The elk won't know what hit him." Tim chuckled, but inwardly he knew how much was riding on this hunt. Peaches Ridge wasn't forgiving. If they weren't prepared, they could easily come home empty-handed, or worse, not at all. The hunt. The morning air was sharp and cold as they set out from camp, their breath visible in the faint pre-dawn light. The ridge loomed above them, shrouded in mist, its rocky outcrops and dense pine groves, creating a labyrinth of potential hiding spots for the elk. Hours passed as they climbed higher, their boots crunching through frost-covered grass. They paused frequently to glass the terrain, scanning for movement. It was Charlie who spotted him first. "There," he whispered, pointing to a distant meadow. Tim raised his binoculars and sucked in a breath. The bull was massive, its antlers stretching wide and high like a crown. "That's him," Tim murmured. "That's our bull." The next few hours were a test of patience and skill. They stalked carefully, using the terrain to stay out of sight, their movements deliberate and silent. The wind was in their favor, carrying their scent away from the bull. When they finally reached a vantage point within range, Tim set up his rifle and took a deep breath. "You ready?" Charlie asked, his voice steady. Tim nodded, exhaling slowly as he lined up the shot. The crack of the rifle echoed through the valley, and the bull stumbled before collapsing into the grass. They waited, hearts pounding, before approaching to confirm the kill. Standing over the downed bull, Tim and Charlie shared a look of triumph and relief. The journey to Peaches Ridge had been long and challenging, but the reward was worth every step. Together, they began the hard work of breaking down the animal and packing it out, their camaraderie forged even stronger by the experience. Back at camp. By the time they returned to camp, their packs were heavy with meat, and their bodies were sore but satisfied. They worked quickly to hang the quarters from a sturdy tree limb to cool and to ensure scavengers couldn't get to it. After tending to the meat, Tim and Charlie set up their makeshift kitchen. Charlie sliced fresh elk tenderloin while Tim peeled and diced potatoes. That night, the two sat by the campfire, enjoying a hearty meal of tenderloin and fried potatoes. The fire crackled, its warmth cutting through the chilly November air. They raised their tin cups, filled with a splash of whiskey. "To Peach's Ridge," Tim said. "And to us," Charlie added. They clinked cups and drank, savoring the moment. A disturbance in the night. The tranquility didn't last. As the campfire died down and the two hunters turned in for the night, the forest around them seemed to come alive. Tim awoke to the sound of faint footsteps outside the tent. At first, he thought it might be a deer or an elk, but then he heard the unmistakable snap of a branch. "Charlie," he whispered, shaking his friend awake. "Did you hear that?" Charlie groggily sat up. "What is it?" Before Tim could answer, another sound reached their ears. A low, guttural chatter, almost like voices but too distorted and inhuman to be understood. The two froze, listening intently as the strange noises seemed to circle the camp. Tim reached for his flashlight and rifle. "Stay here," he whispered, unzipping the tent just enough to peer outside. The moonlight cast eerie shadows across the trees, but he couldn't see anything. The sounds, however, persisted, closer now, almost as if whatever was out there was watching them. Charlie, now fully awake, grabbed his own rifle. "You see anything?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Tim shook his head. "Nothing yet." The two sat in silence, their ears straining for any sign of movement. Then Tim's eyes widened as he suddenly realized something. "You don't think it's after the elk, do you?" Charlie frowned, the thought dawning on him as well. "Could be. That's a lot of meat hanging out there." Tim felt a surge of protectiveness for their hard-earned prize. "We can't let anything take it," he said, gripping his rifle tighter. The strange sounds eventually faded into the distance, but neither Tim nor Charlie slept soundly that night. Morning couldn't come fast enough, and when it did, they stepped out into the cold dawn to check the elk quarters. To their relief, everything was still intact, but the unease lingered. Something was out there, and Tim couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't done with them yet. Charlie's turn for the hunt. The eerie events of the night left Tim and Charlie on edge, but they resolved to push forward with their hunt. Charlie had been patient throughout the trip, lending his skills to help Tim harvest his bull. Now it was his turn. Despite the strange noises and the lurking mystery in the forest, the pull of Peach's Ridge was too strong to resist. "Today's your day," Tim said as they packed their gear. He gave Charlie a grin that betrayed his lingering nervousness. "Let's find you a bull to match mine." Charlie chuckled, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "As long as we don't run into whatever was out here last night." The sun crept higher as they hiked deeper into the ridge, their boots crunching through frost-kissed underbrush. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and the promise of a clear day. They moved carefully, scanning the terrain for signs of movement. Around midday, they spotted a promising sign, a large set of tracks in the fresh snow. Charlie crouched beside them, studying the pattern. "Looks fresh," he whispered. "He can't be far." Tim nodded, motioning for them to follow the trail. The tracks led them through a stand of aspens and up a steep incline. At the crest, they paused, glancing at the valley below. Tim spotted movement near the edge of a clearing. "There," he whispered, pointing. A bull stepped into view, its light coat blending almost seamlessly with the shadowed tree line. Its antlers gleamed in the midday sun, a testament to its age and dominance. Charlie's eyes lit up with determination as he raised his binoculars. "Big boy," he muttered. "He's mine." Tim nodded, settling in behind a tree to keep watch. Charlie slowly dropped to a knee, bringing his rifle to his shoulder. He exhaled slowly, lining up the shot. The bull raised its head, its ears twitching as if sensing the hunter's presence. "Take your time," Tim whispered, though his own heart raced. Charlie squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report echoed through the valley, and the bull jolted, stumbling a few steps before collapsing. A cheer erupted from Charlie, but the celebration was short-lived. Heavy, rapid footsteps sounded from the hill behind them, thudding like a drumbeat. Tim and Charlie froze, their eyes snapping toward the source of the noise. Branches snapped and trees swayed as something massive barreled down the slope toward the downed elk. "What the hell?" Charlie started, but his words died as a towering figure emerged from the tree line. It was unlike anything they'd ever seen. The creature was enormous, easily over 8 feet tall, with a thick coat of dark, matted hair. Its eyes burned with an intense intelligence as it charged into the clearing, its focus locked on the fallen elk. "Bigfoot," Tim breathed, unable to tear his eyes away. The creature reached the elk and let out a guttural roar that reverberated through the air. Without hesitation, it hoisted the massive animal onto its shoulder as if it weighed nothing. Tim and Charlie could only watch in stunned silence, their rifles forgotten in their hands. "We've got to stop it," Charlie hissed, but Tim grabbed his arm. "Are you insane? Look at it." The creature turned its head, its gaze landing on the two hunters. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then, with a snarl that sent shivers down their spines, it disappeared into the forest, moving with an agility that belied its size. The two men sat in stunned silence, their hearts pounding. Finally, Charlie spoke, his voice shaky. "Did that really just happen?" Tim nodded slowly, his mind racing. Yeah, it did." They both knew their story would be met with skepticism, but that didn't matter. They'd seen something most people could only dream of, or fear. Though Charlie's elk was gone, they were alive, and perhaps that was victory enough. The rest of their trip was quieter, the hunt overshadowed by the strange encounter. As they packed up camp and prepared to leave Peach's Ridge, Tim turned to Charlie. "Think we'll ever see it again?" he asked. Charlie shrugged, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "If we do, let's make sure it doesn't steal our next elk." They both laughed, the tension finally breaking. Despite the loss, they left Peach's Ridge with more than just memories of the hunt. They had a story, one that would bond them for the rest of their lives, and one they'd never forget. An annual tradition. Every spring, as Washington's gray skies began to brighten, the Evans family embarked on their cherished tradition, a road trip to the coast. Their trusty motorhome, a vintage Winnebago named Big Blue, was both their transportation and home for the journey. The adventure began in the early hours, with Greg Evans at the wheel, Emily navigating from the passenger seat, and Lily and Max lounging in the cozy living area. Their first stop was always Coupeville, a picturesque town on Whidbey Island. After wandering the docks and enjoying the salty breeze, they boarded the Keystone Ferry, with Big Blue tucked snugly into the hull alongside other vehicles. The ferry ride was a favorite part of the trip. This year, the sun glinted off the water as a pod of orcas surfaced in the distance, drawing gasps and camera clicks from the passengers. Once they arrived in Port Townsend, they joined Highway 101, the famous coastal road that wound through forests, cliffs, and ocean views. After a day of exploring tide pools, hiking trails, and stopping at roadside diners, the Evans family reached their campground, a secluded spot tucked among towering old-growth firs with a view of the ocean. They parked Big Blue in a corner site, unfolded their camping chairs, and set about making dinner. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the campground came alive with a warm, communal energy. Families roasted marshmallows over crackling fires, the scent of evergreen mingling with toasted sugar. Children darted between campsites, while the occasional strum of a guitar drifted through the air. It was during this golden hour that the Evans family met the Parkers, fellow travelers in a sleek, modern RV parked just across the way. Greg struck up a conversation with Matt Parker about their favorite road trip routes, while Emily and Sarah Parker swapped recipes for campfire meals. Max found an instant friend in the Parkers' son Liam, as they bonded over their shared fascination with spotting constellations. That evening, the two families gathered around a single campfire. Lily shared ghost stories with the Parkers' daughter Chloe, while Matt played a soft tune on his guitar. Together, they laughed, sang, and marveled at the brilliance of the Milky Way stretched across the night sky. It was during one of these conversations, as the stars began to twinkle overhead, that Matt leaned closer to Greg, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know, Greg," Matt began, glancing over his shoulder as if to ensure no one else could hear, "Highway 101 isn't just famous for its scenery. We've had some strange encounters there." Greg raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Strange? How?" Matt poked the fire with a stick, the flames crackling in response. 2 years ago, we were driving late at night, somewhere near the Quinault rainforest. The kids were asleep, and Sarah was dozing off, but I swear I saw something huge on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a bear, but it stood up, taller than any bear I've ever seen, and walked into the trees. Greg chuckled nervously. "You're saying you saw Bigfoot?" Matt nodded, his expression serious. "I know how it sounds, but it wasn't just that. We heard strange noises, howls, knocking sounds, and once we woke up to find giant footprints around our RV at a campsite near the Hoh rainforest. We've avoided camping too deep in the woods since then." Emily, overhearing the conversation, joined in. "Are you trying to spook us, Matt?" she teased, though there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. Matt shrugged. "I'm just saying, keep your wits about you. This area has its share of legends, and some of them might be more than just stories." That night, as the Evans family lay in Big Blue, the usual comforting sounds of the forest, rustling leaves, the occasional hoot of an owl, felt strangely amplified. Max, ever the adventurer, was thrilled by the possibility of spotting Sasquatch, while Lily insisted it was just a tall tale. The next morning, as they prepared to head back onto Highway 101, Greg found himself scanning the dense woods more closely than usual. The road stretched ahead, beautiful and wild, a reminder that even well-traveled paths could hold secrets. While the family laughed it off, the story lingered, especially in Max's mind. So when they spotted a hand-painted sign along the highway that read, "Bigfoot Discovery Center, next exit," Max practically jumped out of his seat. "Dad, we have to stop," Max shouted, his face pressed to the window. Greg chuckled. "What do you think, crew? Detour to the land of Sasquatch?" Emily rolled her eyes playfully. "Why not? We could use a stretch break." Big Blue rumbled off the highway and onto a gravel driveway leading to a rustic, wood-paneled building surrounded by towering pines. The sign above the door featured a cartoonish Bigfoot waving, and the parking lot was dotted with Sasquatch-themed murals and statues. Inside, the Bigfoot Discovery Center was a quirky mix of humor and mystery. Displays showcased supposed plaster casts of enormous footprints, blurry photographs, and newspaper clippings of sightings from decades past. A life-size statue of Bigfoot stood in the corner, its glassy eyes seeming to follow visitors around the room. "Look at this one," Max exclaimed, pointing at a grainy black-and-white photo of a shadowy figure in the woods. "It's probably a guy in a gorilla suit," Lily said, smirking. "Or maybe it's real," Greg added with a wink. The centerpiece of the center was a small theater showing a looped documentary about local Bigfoot sightings. As they sat on creaky wooden benches, they learned about the Quinault rainforest's reputation as a hotbed of activity. Eyewitnesses described hearing strange howls and finding massive, human-like footprints deep in the woods. After the film, they wandered through the gift shop, where Max convinced his parents to buy him a Sasquatch research team. hat, and a keychain shaped like a Bigfoot footprint. As they left the center, Greg glanced back at the cartoonish Bigfoot sign and shook his head with a grin. Well, that was an unexpected detour. It was fun, Max insisted, and now we know what to look for if we see one. Back on Highway 101, the Evans family continued their journey, but the stop at the Bigfoot Center had added a new layer of excitement. Every shadow in the trees, every unexplained sound from the forest, took on a new significance. That evening, as they set up camp by the ocean, Max regaled his family with his theories about Sasquatch, while Lily teased him relentlessly. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the family enjoyed a peaceful evening around the campfire, laughing and sharing stories. But as the fire burned down and the darkness deepened, the forest seemed to come alive with an unsettling energy. It began with distant, rhythmic knocks echoing from the woods. Probably just someone chopping wood, Greg said, though his voice betrayed a hint of uncertainty. Emily frowned. At this hour, the knocks grew louder, closer, followed by an eerie, guttural sound that sent shivers down their spines, a mix of a growl and a howl, unlike any animal they'd ever heard. Max froze, clutching his Sasquatch hat. "What was that? An owl," Lily suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. Greg stood, his eyes scanning the tree line. "I'll take a quick look," he said, grabbing a flashlight. "Greg, wait," Emily urged, but he was already stepping into the darkness. The flashlight beam cut through the trees, illuminating trunks and branches but revealing nothing unusual. Then a heavy thud echoed through the air, as if something massive had just hit the ground. "Greg," Emily called, her voice trembling. "I'm fine," he replied, though he wasn't so sure. Something moved in the shadows, a tall, hulking shape that disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. "Hello," Greg called, his voice firm but edged with fear. No response, only silence. Suddenly, a low growl came from behind him. Spinning around, Greg's flashlight caught a pair of reflective eyes staring back from the underbrush, too high off the ground to belong to a deer. His breath caught as the figure stepped forward, just enough for him to make out its outline, a towering, hairy creature with broad shoulders and an unmistakable air of power. Greg stumbled back toward the campsite, his heart pounding. "Get inside," he shouted. The family scrambled into Big Blue, locking the doors behind them. From inside, they could hear the forest erupting with noise, heavy footsteps circling the motorhome, low growls, and the sound of branches snapping. Max peeked out the window but quickly ducked down. "It's out there," he whispered. "I saw it." The motorhome rocked slightly, as if something had pressed against it. Emily gasped, pulling the kids closer. Greg grabbed a frying pan from the kitchenette, as if it would help. Minutes felt like hours as the family huddled together, the sounds outside eventually fading into the night. When all was quiet again, Greg cautiously peered out the window. The campsite was empty, save for the dim outline of the forest and the soft glow of the moon. At first light, they ventured outside. In the dirt around Big Blue were massive footprints, each one twice the size of Greg's shoe, leading back into the forest. "I told you it was Bigfoot!" Max exclaimed, his voice equal parts fear and excitement. Greg looked toward the woods, his face pale. Whatever it was, let's not stick around to find out. The family quickly packed up and hit the road, the weight of the night's events heavy in the air. As they drove down Highway 101, the forest felt less welcoming, its shadows hiding secrets they'd rather not uncover. And yet, as they recounted the story, laughter began to creep in, mingling with the adrenaline. The encounter had shaken them, but it also bonded them in a way no ordinary road trip could. Somewhere out there, the forest still held its mystery, and the Evans family would never forget the night they came face to face with it. Entertained? Click on one of these links for more.